Winners of four in a row. They are 11-4 in their last 15. You can look back at different stages of it, but I'm going to just say 15 because it's a round number. Um, that's the second best record over the last 15 games in the league, behind the Celtics, who, had 11-game winning streak, and they had a couple losses this last week. Um, they are number 2 in the league in defense in that stretch. Again, you can look back to different stages. They've been generally playing very good defense for the second half of the season, and that has been the story of this pretty significant turnaround. The other story is that they're healthy. I'm sure all of New Orleans is knocking on all the wood they can find, because it's been the defining characteristic of this team for a couple of years now. But they are healthy, and it's showing in their results. And Pelton, one of the things about this team that I think is important to talk about as we are here getting into mid-March is, one, they're the second. I think actually they are tied with Minnesota. The Timberwolves lost on Sunday night in LA, but they are tied with Minnesota now because they had a road win on Sunday themselves. They are tied with Minnesota for most road wins in the league with 21, and that defense is traveling, which I think is a big part of it. And they have morphed from one of the weaker outside shooting teams in the league to a genuine threat from the perimeter. And it has gotten them, and granted, and Bontemps has talked about this on previous shows, about how the Western Conference is constantly very volatile. So we're not going to make any ironclad statements here, but it's gotten them into solidified 5th place. They're 2 games clear of the Suns as we record this for 6. As all these teams are fighting all over themselves and clawing each other, trying to get to 6, the Pelicans have opened up a little bit of breathing room there. I'll talk about their schedule in a second. But Pelton, the Pelicans are kind of overlooked because you don't trust them. But it's time, I think, to start paying attention to them.
Yeah, I mean, look, you said second half of the season, second best defense. You can go all the way back to their loss to the Lakers in the play-in tournament that, obviously a lot of people were watching that night, tuning into what had been, the biggest game for the Pelicans in the Zion Williamson era, and they completely laid an egg in that one. But since that moment, they are number 2, not only in defensive rating in the league, and I didn't realize this until I looked it up, they're number 2 in net rating, period, in the NBA over that span behind the Boston Celtics, which is pretty shocking when you consider, the teams that even have better records than them over that span, like the Clippers. I think the Nuggets may still have a better record, Oklahoma City. But in terms of a per possession basis, New Orleans has outplayed them. And, look, I think there probably was some element of a wake-up call to that play-in tournament loss, particularly for Zion Williamson. And, I was listening to the Pels broadcast the other day, and Joel Myers and Antonio Daniels mentioned that, the national media only likes to talk about Zion Williamson when he's not playing well, and that it's gotten really quiet while he's going through a good stretch here. And, we see him, we acknowledge him, but the thing that's really changed, as you mentioned, is the help. And in particular, what happened right around the same time as the play-in tournament is our NBA draft night colleague on the Hoop Collective live stream, Trey Murphy III, got back into the lineup.
That's right.
And he's averaging 10 3-point attempts per 36 minutes this season, which would put him in the top 10 in the league. He's not shooting outstanding, the 10 3-point game the other night aside, by his standards, but just the threat that he poses is enormous. And he's been a huge X factor for this team. If you go to Basketball Reference and sort by the game score on his game-by-game player page, which is kind of a summary of box score performance, they are 10-0 in his 10 best games and 1-6 in his 7 worst games. So when Trey Murphy III plays well, the Pelicans are extraordinarily difficult to beat.
Well, it's not really surprising when you look at his skill set too, right? I mean, we've constantly talked about how that team needs defense and shooting around Zion, and he's, sort of a prototypical 3-and-D wing who also has the ability to maybe grow into more stuff. The bottom line is they are 8th in offense, 6th in defense, 4th in net rating. They are right there in terms of across the board production with anybody in the league. And they have been healthy for a while. They have stabilized in the middle of the West. They do with some of these, nagging injuries that the Clippers have. There is, I think, an outside chance they could maybe push up a little bit closer to them. Maybe they get to 4th. in the West. But as it sits here right now, and we sort of touched on it on Thursday, I think the Pelicans are sort of the team everyone's sitting there saying, well, if we got the Pelicans, that'd be a pretty good outcome, despite all of that. Because for all of the flaws of the teams behind them, the fact of the matter is, despite the fact that he's healthy, and to Joel and Antonio's point, no one's really talking about Zion Williamson. He was healthy and wasn't close to being an all-star this year, really. And if you look at the other teams that we're talking about, with Dallas and Luka Doncic, with Phoenix, Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, with the Lakers, with LeBron and AD, with the Warriors, with Steph, you're going to be a lot more concerned about playing any of those teams in a 7-game series against one of those guys if they're healthy than you are against the Pelicans. In part because the one time we've seen him play in a game that had some sort of stakes on it in the NBA was that game in Vegas, and they got demolished isn't even a proper term for it. And they basically have disappeared ever since. So it is going to be interesting to me over this final month of the season. Anytime they get lined up against one of these other teams, I'm going to be curious to see what that matchup looks like, because they are right in the middle of all this stuff in the West and probably are going to get a pretty prime first round matchup against one of these teams. And people will go into it, I think, generally, despite their resume, saying whoever the Pelicans are playing is going to be favored to win.
Well, they're going to go through a good schedule test here in a little bit. But before I get to that, about Zion, his numbers, and before I say this, I'm not basing his season just on his stats, but just to be clear about Zion and his attention, his numbers are down pretty straight across the board. He is averaging the fewest points he has in his career. He's shooting the lowest percentage of his career, although he's still shooting 57%. He's still a beast, but he's just a little bit less efficient that way. He's averaging the fewest rebounds of his career. His steals are down. His arguably though his minutes are down too, and that's part of it. The most important stat though is he's played 52 games, and he is, I'm not assuming anything with him, but his career high played is 61, which was his second season in 2021. Now, what he has is the most assists of his career, and that is because part of the changes that they've made that has helped them is that he played point guard a little bit early in his career. It was one of Stan Van Gundy's big strategies with him, and they had some success. He's back playing quite a bit of time at point guard, and so he's not playing the same type of style of offense, and they're getting more production from the other shooters. You mentioned Pelton, Trey Murphy having a good year. Herb Jones has, Fred Vinson, who's the development, I don't know his exact title with the Pelicans, but he's their development coach. And
whatever his title is, he's shooting guru. That's yes. What he is.
And he's got some good success stories on his resume already. I don't have it chapter and verse, but he's well respected.
Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, two guys who we didn't think of as shooters when they got there from the Lakers. And, unfortunately, we haven't seen it with Lonzo in a while, but became a really good 3-point shooter, and Brandon Ingram has as well.
Yeah.
And just the numbers, because I looked them up, or do you have them there?
No, go ahead.
Herb Jones, first 2 years of his career, and for people who haven't watched the Pelicans closely, he's one of the best defenders in the league. Herb Jones was a defensive player of the year at Alabama, coming in the league. The question was, can he ever develop any kind of shot? His first years in the league, shot a couple threes a game, shot 33%. This year, he's up to 3.5 attempts a game. More importantly, he's 90 out of 207, which is 43.5% from three. And if that guy, let's say he goes down to 38 or 39%, if he doesn't stay at 43%, that's a absolute game-changing thing if Herb Jones is a 40-ish% three-point shooter going forward with his defensive ability.
Pelton, I think he's one of the top three-point shooters in the league, percentage-wise, since like January 1st. I think he's almost 50% and has been, giving even better. So you've got those two things. Zion is scoring less. I think that's maybe a good thing. Also, Brandon Ingram is scoring less. He's taking fewer shots. He's playing fewer minutes. distributing the ball. I think he had double-digit assists. On Sunday, they won in Atlanta. Atlanta is really beat up right now. Obviously, Trae Young is out the rest of the season, and Jalen Johnson and Onyeka Okongwu are also out. Like, Atlanta's really just going game to game right now. A couple teams in the East, but nonetheless, it was a road win. But I think Ingram had over. Let me see how many assists he had on Sunday. I think he had a really good assist.
While you're looking
game.
that up, since January 1st, Herb Jones, 29 games. The Pelicans are 18-11. He's shooting 53.5% from three, 59 for 110. And that's well north of, again, significantly over 3 attempts a game, which isn't a ton, but it's enough. And he's making them. And that's a really, really big deal.
Yeah. So anyway, Brandon Ingram down 3 points a game, down a couple of shots a game. But the Pelicans are performing well. So they're spreading around their offense more. And Ingram, like Zion, is very much a distributor. He's essentially a point forward. The ball goes into his hands a lot, and he creates a lot. He's averaging almost 6 assists a game. He's actually averaging more assists than Zion. So, when you watch their offense, CJ McCollum is a guy who can be the trigger man. Ingram, Zion, they move it around and they really defend. So they've stitched together a more dynamic offense than they've had in recent years. And they have, Willie Green really since day one has been, Willie Green came from Golden State and Phoenix. Golden State was definitely known for its defense, and Phoenix had played really good defense. When he came there, they weren't quite their peak. They were there was the year he came there was the year they won over 60 games. But he came there as a defensive-minded coach. He certainly was a defensive-minded player when he was in the league. And he has really established them as a defensive team. And when they've been healthy, they've been a good defensive team. Despite, at times there to be challenges. And I haven't watched them enough to give a fair assessment of how Zion's individual defense has been, but the numbers show that they're doing a really good job as a team defense. Now, let me talk a little bit about their schedule. They have a couple of really good tests this week that'll test this winning streak. Wednesday, they play Cleveland. Cleveland has been without 3 starters. Got routed on their home court by the Nets on Sunday. I don't know if any of those guys are going to be back by then.
So maybe not the best test of how real they are as a team.
Well,
maybe
depends how Sam Merrill is shooting it.
That's true.